Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the 5 skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The 5 skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so on up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
大愿诸愿者王公愿颂，马列西迦结见随便度，下觉作我的那所我的，多觉见波的现多觉常，求在的罗波当那罗波。边求周边波动阿爹强，娘嘞心罗吉罗娑我的，上波多面也念那着的，求的地愿的当周边边，在当各自六年四年波，要紧区别吉罗娑我的。然有月面兄弟乐中道，大王周波日别各就见，方觉公众宝宝有子所，上门道月觉了所望的，接住当别穷阿的上，高当天边面部中的见。念着那些过去所拉所，嘎当那么那拉所完的，刚见心的所见所完过，我到这边我说就做见，当我天边到不开着见，要是就把见了所完的。教宗观点老马多杰长，刚老刚的新年自中年，教导天幕母主自在边，尊见老马那老所完的，让教所着跟老多也面。给上他帮这边就满足，在人这边他看这不易，现在新年能拿说完的，叫我更多养到那么多，这面就这边了落实间，劳动能这有点合作呢。多觉强根功，念多也说三界觉当初觉就能想求不多的呢就多。老给姐姐这边所能见，罗罗偏些上见诸不修上见，越当作见就能了，想求不多的呢就多。老给姐姐这边所能见，罗罗偏些上见诸不修上见就。初见就能了，想求不多的念就做见，老给姐姐这边所能见，老了便是上见诸不有。哎，呀，当然是对境恰见那些，他搞到没那么多的说的，你通常你来小啊你，你通嘛小啊，你跟上去吧，是吧
？As usual, there are two important activities that one need to carry out while receiving the teachings and at the end of teachings. So before receiving the teachings, importance of cultivation and motivations. So we will be engaging in the cultivation of positive motivations at this point.
안되지. 당만서 결론 줘봐라. 다 결론 줘서 유다 뒤에 타니스 개체가 많다. 얘나요. 언지 차지다 되면 보지잖아. 아니 랑게 되냐 난가 되냐라. 니 덤버 투병 뭐. 아니 당시 왜 저랑지 걸려 주변 저 풍비이나. 니 쇼니도 저 주동기 쇼와 세용데 아니 지 대도 예매적 안에 세나면도 간제 던져지기. 당시 왜 저랑지 지제네 랑게 면서 되냐 난가 되라 미바체.
So now to cultivate appropriate motivations, let's visualize Buddha, Shakyamuni in front of oneself with a radiant light radiating from the body of the Buddha, or in the form of visualizing Buddha actually Buddha, visualize Buddha in the form of a rose form, the great bliss and emptiness.
나 등록이 때부터 투비 안 보이겠네. 된데나마 아니. 라이나 버잖아 아니. 가서 저와 상방 공부는 저전 잠에요. 배상을 상인다고. 아니 소소 뒤에 집아. 아니 뒤에 집아게 나래 집에 늘르다 통에. 아니 저와도 지창네 집에. 아니 라마나제 랑게 전체 차이남도 라마나 아니 시지도 전화 봐라. 근데 라니를 또 저와 침배만에 지심바 여바지. 아니 그런 저사 유들지.
So having visualized the Buddha in front of oneself, who is then surrounded by all those great lineage gurus of Manjushri, Maitreya, Vajradhara, as well as Vajrapani.
다들 랑게 되잖아요. 되잖아요. 제 아니 랑치고 임바 맞아가지. 지고 매바 간데 두고서나 대화되지 감각 미치바 인자나 소소견도 봐야서 될 수도 쓰이는데 그런 용거에 친인다고 지로와. 맞아 샤시오든 무슨 건가 저게 나오는 강는 대회도 가지. 대박 소소견도 봐 주비 된다로. 대나기 가서 대현지 아니 감각 미치 임바데 소소기 대지도다 인자네. 아니 감각 소소냐도 여바데 도알에 진센데 대바. 인산에 타협이 선전나 내란다 라냐데 아니 지 된도 대화 주에게는 되린 니다 가제 가서 더 chuyên 되는 해여서나 되기를 인들이 재미받지.
So then, visualizing being oneself in the presence of all those great masters, as the great masters that we have visualized earlier, Buddha and surrounding great lineage gurus. So you yourself being in their presence, surrounded by all sentient beings without exception. The reason why we are visualizing all sentient beings without exception, along with oneself, is because as we long to achieve happiness and overcome suffering, so too all those beings have a similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings, all the way, including, animals such as birds, insects, and so on and so forth, right from the beginning of their day, early, from the morning until they retire, always, wandering around, looking for achievement of their happiness, and so forth. So it is worthwhile, and it is also relevant to visualize all sentient beings along with us.
는 드려지게는 선전한 매비 년지세외데 근데 상바던 저와데 선전지를 강갈 판량도 생도로서 되게 배자고요. 아주 신각 강부 되는 노로 초당연히 같이 편도하고도 생도로서 저러 근데 소속이 저와데 상비 상제데 네 선전 자신이 강각이 끊어 봤지 생도be 소리지 자소나 소소 텐지데 라도 되제네 인도네 슈베 담바트달라이네 대바체네 대바다 니지니 대스용 베탄달 가만히 스치미 바체게다.
So now, try to cultivate compassion and love and compassion, and extend this love and compassion towards all other sentient beings. And just imagine that the unconditional compassion and love that you have extended towards all other sentient beings are so pure that it actually, as if that the love and compassion, the energy of love and compassion are actually observing, they're all actually dissolving into the sentient beings, just like water actually dissolves into the dry land. Similarly, that when you visualize compassion, that unconditional compassion and love, extending towards all of the sentient beings, and observing those compassion and love into within all sentient beings. So therefore, with the cultivation of faith towards the object of refuge and cultivation of love and compassion towards all other sentient beings, with this too, let's take a couple of minutes to meditate on it.
다 드리게는 결혼 치바지는 맞게 되네. 다 맞게 체내서 벌어 셰버이 신경되게 가르치고 영역되게 가르치고 소소를 좋아지고 아이나. 안 당아서 땡지 대지주다. 땡지 대지주다 세대 제 소소는 저지는 명예지 사체전다지를 잘라져라다 소지 많이 봐. 근데 라니는 게 봐도 그에 네, 라니기 휴지 되는 요행이게 안 땡도 대화생이지. 네 봐도 가지 두고 버리 생이지.
So, let's begin with asking a question to ourselves. With having cultivated such positive motivations, why are we here? What kind of teachings that you are receiving? For what purpose that you are receiving this teaching? It's now answer to the question is that a purpose of receiving the Dharma teaching is to achieve lasting happiness or the ultimate state of ultimate happiness. So when speaking about ultimate happiness, it's not something that cannot be achieved, something we're not aspiring to achieve something that cannot be achieved, something which is not related to oneself. If you really examine very carefully, the achievement of ultimate happiness can be achieved by means of one's practice. So this is the potential of achieving such happiness, the seeds of achieving such happiness within our continuum. So therefore, everything that the teachings or whoever is giving the teachings or whoever is listening to the teachings is for the purpose of achievement of ultimate state of happiness. So it is therefore, in order to achieve happiness, the method or skillful means or unmistaken method and skillful means which enables one to achieve this state of happiness is the teachings that we are receiving today, which is Lam Rim Chenmo by Lama Tsongkhapa, great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment.
아니 메에 넘버지베는 루루도 통면에 아니 당가속에 랑게 제자이라면 봐 아니 라마는 집어담바 아니 거네 뒤중에 나와나겠지 버세지 저집에서 지게니 되라 and Tantan Zamilin de la in Tamania, Jumashiba Yongi, and Sosogi, Tandriki Zailama Sogi, Jesse there, and Sosomanachi, Gawachi, about the Chiro.
So now, speaking about the author of these teachings. So if we were to trace the root of this author of this teaching, is Buddha Shakyamuni. The Buddha Shakyamuni is the one who actually authored such teachings of the stages to the path to enlightenment and transmitted to his disciples, such as disciples who are in a form of deity, Manjushri, Maitreya, Vajra, and so forth, and Vajrapani and so forth, and then in the form of the followers in the form of human, the great followers such as Nagarjuna, Asanga, and so forth. And so this is how this teachings is transmitted from Buddha to his disciples and all the way to one's own root guru. So it is such a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and it is fortunate for all of us to be able to have access to such a wonderful teachings.
The Chuchi Chewa then do Divajishana, any Dero, Domani Jene, any Mansama member, Dayan in Jeja Yonsuzobi Chewas, Jije. Any send you told so then be lot long day Chewas, Nije. Any Shinta Chemboni Lula Kibi, and Lamani Jemanga Java, said the Jong Jusos and the Demon Tisos and Kison Soba Shuji, and the Chuchi Chewadela.
Somebody got so much. Somebody
Shinta Chemboni Lula Kibi, Lamani Jemanga Java.
All Menga Campus. So here, this is such a wonderful teaching. The teaching that we're receiving here is, which actually, one can say this teaching is a compendium of the teachings of all the Buddhist, all the teachings of the Dharma. In other words, Buddhist teachings. Entire teachings of Buddhist teachings is actually encapsulated within this text, because it actually, encapsulates both sutra and tantra, and then also it is very convenient to practice, and cultivating the instructions that are given in this particular teachings are the cultivation of the method and skillful means of subduing one's mind. And the third, such teaching is actually, the teachings is actually ornamented by the commentary of the great Indian masters, such as two pioneers, namely referring to Nagarjuna and Asanga. So then how to listen to the teachings and how to give the teachings, which requires one to cultivate appropriate motivations, which we have already discussed about earlier. So now this will then be followed by the other very important outlines, which are the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions, and importance of relying on the teacher, which is the root of one's spiritual path. How the students train their mind after having relied on the teachers.
다 집에 챔비 나지를 뭐냐서 년sel에 자이사제 송 대전은 집에 고당바 선제 코나된바 선대 제다 집에 주 선진의 쇼발로 주예제 다 동문인 제사 다 선진의 쇼발로 로제될 송제 선진의 로발로 로그베 전세 로발레 월로 로베 산제 문주바 된바 로발로 로베 림바 니시바 아제 다 동문인 제사 다 로발로 로베 림바 니시바 되라 자이사제 니세요 개바치 못절라로 제당 제바도 도제 대발은 허수예지 다 동보라 양 사지 송제 니 상선제 라발라 로고 비전세 상선제 말에 상선제 라발라 혼대장 장내 제세제 담바송 존에 제단님 비추에 존에 니 제단님 비제 존에 제단녀스님 비치라 상선제 라발라 혼대장 장내 제세제 담바송 존에 제단로 비추에 다 존에 제단로 비추되는 양 사지 송래 네 강라로 비저 델라바는 뒤시 델라로 비림바 오지 다 동번인 제사 다 델라로 비림바 되는 양 사지 송래 사진이 쇼바줄로 제도 안치바도 파세 타만요는 노츠예지 다 동번은 양 사지 송래 사지 동번은 사지 송마를 사진이래 랑기 주상제제 랑게 상제제 주민바시와 파르제 심바당 니 젠지 주민바시와 뉴용보절로 주예제 다 동bol라 주르 진바네 아니 시라지 바다 주예제 다 대노노 동보시비 파신로 제된 지사 다 니바 추천지지면 파신절로 지라 사지 자유 사지 응안도 아니 추천정어 대강발은 주비 더 추천지 라도야와 대다게 대다 주비세 제다샤와 대다게 된디바오스 당가서 때려 제세제 담바존에 아니 유동이 자세 쇼발라 하고면은 하치데라 파르지신 바조다 뉴용보지 니에베나네 파르신 바조 데이노 가서 거서 봐봐 아니 추천지 파신라 노지 되는 데르레스.
So we are under the headings of the engaging the practice, how to practice the six perfections, the Bodhisattva's deeds. And out of six perfections, we have actually covered, we have already completed discussing on the first perfections, which is the perfection of generosity. At the particular point, well, at the particular, currently that we are under the particular headings of the perfection of ethical disciplines. When speaking about these ethical disciplines, there are five outlines. The ethical discipline, what ethical discipline is, how to begin the cultivation of ethical disciplines, the divisions of ethical disciplines, how to practice, and the summary.
당가 속에 카투코는 추천이도 과진이나 이니 제네제도 도발에 링아데 링아이레스디 이니 제라 노바시지 제레 도비 이니 링아이 반딩 코지지라 추천스네 진용다이찬.
So in general, what is meant by the ethical discipline, Tsulchum in Tibetan, which is translated in English as ethical discipline or moral discipline. So the ethical discipline is an attitude of abstention that turns your mind away from harming others. This is what is all about ethical disciplines.
당가 속에 던저기 추천의 냐설레베 렌데 중앙라 아니 추천의 편야당 추천 냐설레나 편야 가려리 많이는 님이 가려리 아니 대 강발은 주비 터서되니 추천라 건대 좀 로데 간대 제거래서 나와이나 아니 님이 통배도네 아니 가 편야 통배도나 당들려야 되리.
So here now how do we become oneself as enthusiastic of engaging in practice of moral discipline or the practice of ethical discipline? So here it is important for one to understand the disadvantages of not observing ethical disciplines and advantages or the benefits of observing ethical disciplines. So therefore, one should try one's best to understand and see the advantages of observing ethical disciplines, which enables one to become enthusiastic of engaging in practice of ethical discipline.
제가 검에 랑주 갈라니 대신 추주면은 타면 주세요. 도디네 데레 수익관시.
So here just in the we have a very brief and lucid lines how important the ethical discipline is, where it says just as a blind person cannot see cannot see the path where he or she is walking. Similarly, without ethical discipline, one will not be able to see the Dharma. And just as someone who is crippled, who is crippled cannot walk properly on the path. Similarly, without discipline, you will not be able to. One is unable to embark on the spiritual path.
맞아, 응원도 전에 추천내심에 소외들이 다 맞아. 내내 상인의 손들이 같이 리된 내 집에서 소반데 돈에 아니 연초 표준 소바지 가를 때는 연구를 했어서나 아니 몇개 주번게 추천성 받을 때는 연구를 해야 돼. 다 맞아 남비존에 체크해.
So therefore it says, again, there's no. We have a saying in the there's in the according to that the text where it says. There's no other cause. There's no any other cause for attaining high rebirth other than ethical discipline, the observance of the ethical disciplines. So therefore, it is very, very important. We all have it is common to all the Dharma practitioners, saying that abstention from 10 non-virtuous actions and observance of the 10 virtuous actions is something that is root of our spiritual practice. So we as a non-believer of Creator, or we are the follower of non-theistic religion. So therefore, we are, particularly in the Buddhism, we talked about we ourselves is our own protector, and we ourselves is our own enemy. So therefore, one should. There is no other, independent person to whom that you can rely upon for your own happiness. Happiness must be accomplished by one's own self.
대답 표현하다 님이 레바삼비 케베 데니레 샹추 셈바유 가서 송여 처린다 랑게 데라 깜베 제메샤 셰당 송도.
So now let's continue from the text, which on 147, page 147. Take us in the wise who reflect. Just follow this text. The wise who reflect well on these benefits and grave consequences must safeguard their ethical discipline, as the compendium of the perfection explains. Due to craving for their own happiness, bodhisattvas will not compromise ethical discipline, which must be protected. And also, because you control yourself, you experience happiness. Because you have ornament praised by the learned, you safeguard ethical discipline. As you bring to perfection all the trainings, rely on ethical discipline completely and without pride.
Nyemo tsadung seyun dayu yu 니니 송샤잖아.
유모 차동 세베 다외로와.
니모 차도 세윤 다유.
수점 좀지 가서
수준인시 저마치 위쳐.
수점
니바셔비 저마치 여기 최대 수준에 송라. 수준인시 저마치 위쳐.
Ethical discipline is we have in the abbreviated Lam Rim where it says ethical discipline is the water that actually cleanse all the sins. And then and it is the light of the moon. It is a luminous moon which actually cools and pacifies the heat of delusion. Kebi. With this, the individual will have such a power and potential, just like a king of mountain. So someone who is able to observe ethical discipline purely would be can stand out or can actually distinguished among all other beings. So therefore, such individual who is actually following, who is actually observing this ethical discipline very purely, doesn't need any kind of power. It is by means of observing ethical disciplines will become so powerful yourself. Doesn't need any weapons to defeat your enemies and so forth, because as long as you have such a powerful and pure ethical discipline, will defeat everything. So therefore, by understanding this, one must safeguard one's ethical discipline, like as we save our own eyes, as we protect our eyes. So Lama Tsongkhapa stated that the yogi, I have undergone such, undertaken such practice, and those of you who wish to achieve liberations must do the same. So here it says, just as we have read earlier, the 2 lines, which is due to craving for their own happiness, bodhisattvas will not compromise ethical discipline, which must be protected. So again, let's read through this again. Once again, it says, and also because you control yourself, you experience happiness, right? Because you have the ornament praised by the learned, you safeguard ethical discipline. As you bring to perfection all the trainings, rely on ethical disciplines completely and without pride.
소소 라운드 딩스니 비토네 아니 가서 뭐지 냥도 대반도 세디 아니 냥스 대와다 아니 개변합이 제제 초도 저바도 처리소이 봐 아니 소네 된주게 러바네 비 상황지 용수 줘바도 소이나 아니 에 균조 예메세 대가 저기 아제다 제바메 봐 아니 양다 봐봐 샹비고네 밑에 지지체 용어를 써야 되려도
So such an individual will become so majestic and very, majestic looking, because without, generating any kind of pride and self-importance, just mere having observed this ethical discipline alone will become an ornament praised by the learned, praised by the wise, in other words. Even the noble beings, one will become worthy to be praised by even noble beings.
시송바 다 거라지 말에 시송바 다 송거라지 대양 장에 속에 집어 상당 사담이 핀초 핀송 초바 상라 멤버 세네 신진 당지 주진라 그비 셰더 송바 샤데 데니레 송도.
Then here it says, moreover, after you have cleared away your mere fear of miserable realms, your wish for the mere excellence of deities or humans, safeguard your ethical discipline for the sake of establishing all living beings in ethical discipline, the companion of the perfection states. That's all.
다들 상추선비 추정이 송고에 미유대 다른 대용도 라니 이게 송게 동해라 상당 라이 변 비송소바 터바 장제 니치저 송고 말에 가리체들서는 신체 통지 때도 대화를 급이체다 니치저 송고래 세대 상추선비 단다 거스법이 상추선비 추정대로 와.
So the Bodhisattvas, the observance of their precepts or the vows or the ethical discipline, it's not mere fear of the miserable realms, and wish mere excellence of the deities or human, but the very purpose of their safeguarding ethical discipline is for the sake of establishing entire sentient beings without exception in ethical discipline.
당문에 가서 계시시는 상주선비 담바 존데 아니 령하기 셔바 강연나 집이래가 정연듯이 맞어 제가 던지 끝까지 제가 전화 담배 손이지 차로로 상주선이 담바 존에서데 령하기 셔바 강연바데 선제 당치 연습하네 내가 가르치는 선제 당치 있다는 호구세요데 주례송한테 차로로.
So here now, the fact is now, once you have taken this Bodhisattva's vow, all the conducts of one's body, speech, and mind should be dedicated towards the welfare of other beings. And just like you are actually, representing, if you are actually sent by the government as a delegation or representing the certain government to the different place or the different countries. So whatever that you have to do, that your activities must be dedicated towards the organization or the government who sent you to the different place to represent this particular government. Similarly, once you have taken this Bodhisattva's vows, your body's actions of the body, one's body, speech, and mind should be dedicated towards welfare of other sentient beings.
된적이 가서 이제 했던 저인데 근데 전에는 양 메투어 유시하게 말이로 가서나 그 콩도 반주 가서 강나 가서지 가서 군주라 대바다 내想着呢 이제도 자와첨부 인비기 쇼라 가나슈 첨부 영해지로 안 도쇼라 봐 강주 투투지기는 몇전제와이나 아니 생도 콤비지선 로고 인자네 근데 바로 지라 깔래 점무거는 뒤코도 강아슈 좀 로통에 정우도.
So although at the moment it is not that it is not easy for us to really dedicate all our actions of the body, speech, and mind for the welfare of other sentient beings. Nevertheless, we are having a great faith in Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and we are enthusiastic of engaging in practice of cultivation of compassion and so on. If one tries one's best, if one try to, familiarize such practice with oneself, and at some point, it is due to the constant practice will then enables one to engage in such a practice naturally without, requiring extra efforts to engage in such actions.
타다 추진 달랑 거 면신 제땐 편시 추진 댄셔바 대네 추진 파르 신바송 대외니 손지다 제시다 토리 피송 초람 면세때 추진 주면양의 송샤신 제땐 달라 준비 추진 댄셔소 송도.
So here again, the compendium of the perfection states, whoever aspires to establish in pure ethical discipline, every living being in worlds beyond measure, and relies on ethical discipline to benefit the world, is said to bring ethical discipline to perfection. Therefore, clear away fear of miserable realms, and the wish for the marvelous of the kingdoms and high status, safeguard and flawless ethical disciplines, and depend on ethical discipline because you are striving for the welfare of the world.
다 손바 추진지 야와 추진지 야와네 손데 손도 동비 추진 겨와 추디지 추진 선제 되죠 추진 소 손도.
So now next is the divisions of ethical disciplines. When it comes to the divisions, there are 3 divisions of the ethical disciplines. First, the ethical discipline of restraint. Second, the ethical discipline of gathering virtue. And the third, the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings.
뉴스 걸로 그 저기 나를 참석만 차소나 저쪽에 된hin도 제로 제와이나 그래서 진비 영어들 소소기 고쳐기 진비 영어 지체 아니 여와들라 니 취지 진바 아니 상세히 문제비 저지 진바 송주 아니 추진되라야 추진이 고아데 소소겐디 배선의 강시 고아된도 세보 지체 아니 될라 여와데니 동비 추진 여와치도 추진 선제 되죠 추진 송소여잖아 니 파시 소소마 지자서나 아니 소소기 라반지서지라고.
So I would encourage all of you, if you when we are going through such important teachings, it is important to to jot down those important parts right from the beginning of practice of generosities. We talked about the practice of generosity. What is the nature of practice of generosity, or what is the practice of generosity, in other words, and the divisions of the practice of generosity, such as generosity of material generosity of material generosity, giving the gift to others, and then practice generosity of protecting from fears, generosity of Dharma, and so forth. So and love and so forth. So there are primarily 4 divisions of the generosity. Similarly, one can also remember this: what is the ethical discipline, or the nature of ethical discipline, and then jot down the divisions of ethical disciplines, such as the ethical discipline of restraint, gathering virtue, and welfare of living beings.
So 자사기 체니바 손 로돈들 왜 카시에베 진리 조보된 진로는 제무 통해 리더살라 아니 겐도스기 랑루마 진조가 단다 랑루스데 체니데 야와 아니 코로 체니데 모자 체니 야와레 랑루데 게바도 로는 진지 쪼지 그래 대전은 소소기 과지 해도 그래 소소 커지라로 내나기 저전 데스 공시도 전에 봐서 감바정 로비 걸라야 야와도서 막 장전된 로도나 그치 고네 현로에 지지어로.
We have a tradition at the monastery. There are some students, at the monasteries, who are not that bright enough to memorize the text, and so therefore the masters normally encourage them to memorize the definitions and divisions, and then also the ones on position. We have different positions of opponents and positions of one's own self. So therefore, encouraging that such certain students to memorize those.
소소 타바 리딩라 송베 소소 타비 동대지 상추 셈비 담발라 네바 인나네 침바온 저슈기 쇼지 소타지 담바 응어당 대다당 튜모게 pondo네 담비 수준 인라 소도 대니 대 초보등에 쇼쇼진 저기 자신 거 렌세자
So here now the ethical discipline for restraint first, as the Bodhisattva's level says. The ethical discipline of restraint is 7 types of vows of individual liberations. Thus, given that there are those who have taken vows of individual liberations and are also keeping the Bodhisattva's vows, the ethical discipline of restraint is either the actual vows of individual liberations for the group of either laypersons or the renouncers, or it is a practice of restraint and abstention that would be associated with those actual vows.
소소 탑이 담바이나 아니 다 라주 대가 거로이 지지 담바인 거로와 아니 담비 수준라 인치미지 라중이 지지 담바인 거 말했을라다.
So the here it says if it's 소소 탑이 담바이나 아니 라중
라중이 다 가서 침비 담바 담바서 라주 담바 타망아생이 지어라. 이게 가제 소타지 담바이나 켈레네 아니 단체자네 소타지 담바 진거로 다 소타지 알레 라주마제다 소타지 담바 진거로다. 수준지 말 dombi 수준라 소타지 담바 인거 말이라다 봐.
Okay, so whatever the ethical discipline of restraint and should not be included. It's not necessarily to be the ethical disciplines of individual liberations.
대 단다대 상사노로 소소 담바 송바디 제자가서는 상추 삼바 인에 다 개체노 라중기 담바 용에 지이나 규지제대 소타지 담바레 수준지 담바레 대마에나 무게주를 본딩 코제 방에데 뭐 담바데 아니 가서 dombi certain 인장 소타지 담바 마인서라 침바 세고라다 로조 마인에 지지에 아니 링아 코제 방비기 방디 코제데 dombi certain 인라 소타지 담바 마인서가.
So for instance the bodhisattvas if the bodhisattvas is the renounced bodhisattvas, and his or her observation of the ethical discipline can be both the ethical discipline of restraint and also the ethical discipline of individual liberations. Whereas the lay bodhisattvas, the ethical observance of the lay bodhisattvas, ethical discipline, is, though it is ethical discipline of restraint, it is not ethical discipline of individual liberation.
당가서 도대시나 소타지 담바이나 켈로 겐디 유존의 켈랭게 임바치 아니 dombi certain 켈랭 그빙에 바메지 소타지 가서 켈로 겐디 유존.
So if it is ethical sort of individual liberation vows or the precepts discipline, one must receive this from the masters. This should be the vows and the discipline must be received from the master. However, just the ethical discipline of restraint, it is not necessarily the one should receive such vows from the masters. It doesn't require. It doesn't. There's no involvement of of the preceptor. In other words.
소타지 담비 때도 미롱이 상추 셈비 당대이나 소타다 튜모이 장신제 카나마도와의 제비 카나마도와 지리방비 pendant dombe tsuchen so sondo.
So then it says, also given that there are those who have taken the Bodhisattva's vow, who are unsuited to be a recipients of the vows of individual liberations. The ethical disciplines of the restraint is the practice of restraint and abstention that gives up and any deeds that is wrong by nature and the deeds that is wrong by prohibitions that would be associated with the vows of individual liberation.
다 게친로게 담바 요난다 맨난다 아니 링아기 빵와 듬보데 게 라조다 침반인가기 투모이 빵거에 라진지 칸나 마토와로 와스 아니 대빵비 빵바텔라 dombe tsuchen스라 그래서.
So this is what is called by the restraint, the ethical discipline of restraint. We talked about the 7 types of vows, which is required for both renunciates and also the layperson. And this vows it must be observed by the both renunciates and as well as the lay practitioners.
맞아 지다 칸나 마도스 제비 칸나 마도다 라지 칸나 마도스인데 제비 칸나 마도스데 다 라조도서 에네 청도야다 그제 남발렌선의 청방거세 제비 칸나 마도아레 마도 라신진이 바영에스게 마로와 단다 링마기 덴보테 라신진 메겨와로와.
So here the seven types of the vows at individual liberations. It is Ranjinji Kanamadoa in Tibetan, which means the wrong by nature. It is a non-virtue by nature. You don't really have to have some kind of precepts. Without having a precept, if one is engaged in such activities of 7 types of activities, it is wrong by nature. It is a non-virtuous by nature. And there are some deeds that is wrong by prohibitions, or it's a vows that are proscribed, such as taking alcohol and so forth. That drinking alcohol is not wrong by nature. It is due to certain precepts that you may have taken. So therefore, it falls under the observance of one's precepts. So it is not wrong by nature. It is wrong by prohibitions.
So
let's take a break here for 10 minutes.
이런 것도 좋아 전에 인사요. 그것도 좋아 연락치. 나는 매너가 로버를.
그래서 근데 뒤바로 뒤져지는 게 배우지.
내가 도망가니 되지면 된지잖아. 겨와치대 수치대 질러셔가네. 아니 된지도 지도.
그래서
겨와치대 수치대 질러오게다. 아니 가서 좋아 전에 제가 있나다.
그래서 So let's read the part of this ethical discipline of gathering virtue, and after that we will give a time for asking questions.
네, 겨와치대는도 신루라 수비 겨와라 미네 ranjila machepa jeji jesim mnyamba 당 고내 공도 배워셔봐 오 손도 대만도.
So the ethical discipline, ethical discipline of gathering virtue. The ethical discipline of gathering virtue means that you focus on virtues such as the 6 perfections, and then develop the virtue that you have not developed in your mind. Do not spoil the ones that you have already developed, and increase both of this ever further.
네, 인도 거셔 겨 추디세더라. 맞지? 춘주제는 소소를 여봐. 소소를 민바제. 아니 다다 신루라 소발런도. 아니 다다가 저기지 매개 쥐봉게 수준에 손에네. 지 조베 상제지 사는 로에게. 아니 이 겨와 나르제나요. 소소기 랑질을 뒤터제는. 소소를 용터제더라.
So what is meant by, gathering of virtue? It is also the integrating virtue, in other words, integrating virtue. It's also the word that we use for that. And so what is meant by gathering virtue is now whatever the virtues actions that we may have taken, it is all this, the virtues must be gathered within one's own continuum. That is what is meant by the gathering virtue, such as the gathering virtue of abstention from 10 non-virtuous actions, and the stages of the path, beginning from 10 non-virtuous abstention from 10 non-virtuous actions, all the way to the state of enlightenment. All those practices that you have done and must be, gathered and bringing, putting them into your continuum, in your own stream of being, in other words. So in other words, whatever the practice you may have done, it is not, designed toward external design, designed towards, outward, in other words, outward, but rather it should be inward. It is everything, the practice, whatever the practice we may have done, it is all to bring about the transformation of your own mind. That is what is meant in brief.
다 메시지에서 가서 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 캐롤라는 알리 이게 지단도 때 그때 갈라야 하는 것이 그 저에는 뒤 가서 이거 따는데 저에는 지금 얘는 이거 놓으면
이게 또 알면서
그래서 나한테 페이스북으로 그 이거 저 주주지 따도 그 갈라야 하는 것이
이거디 previously, Karen has asked some questions. It seems that you asked questions and you sent a message to Rinpoche asking some questions. So what are the questions?
I wasn't prepared for that one. I'm not sure if
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's a good one for this for right now, but I could ask another question that I've had.
Okay.
So another question though that I've had for a while is, I think a while back you'd mentioned, Rinpoche, that the Chittamatra sometimes they'll fall back from the Bodhisattva's path. And so one, I was wondering if there were specific reasons for that. And then the other question has to do with Chittamatra following scriptures. And I was just wondering, because for them, they don't believe, or they believe in beings whose roots of virtues are severed, whether or not they can actually enter the Bodhisattva path. Yes.
Can you repeat the second questions? I got the first question, but second question, can you please? It wasn't clear to me.
Sure. So Chittamatra following scripture. My understanding is that they believe in beings whose roots of virtue are severed. So the beings who
virtues are what?
Roots of virtue are severed.
Okay.
And whether or not, then does that keep them from being able to enter the Bodhisattva's path? Because I guess my thought is that if they don't believe, if they're not feeling like they can help all beings, then that kind of goes against what the Bodhisattva thinks.
Okay, Senjambe and the Senjambe and the Tawal and Navy Janju Samba Silvia machine. Did the Janju Samba Dinda Kashe Semke Pa Nyamje and Ma Chikia Sabe in the Yung to us. And then they had the Semjamba and the lungi jerang sem zambe siltume. Lungi jerang sem zambe richi ki ania susu geza nyamni, geza ma nyamni, geza mebachani, yama chik sagin chiorabas. Ti kande sago na sendisibu.
Tero chidang ina nga so tombo ali longi jena ribi jena ma ali sen zamba sengi te chidang ye tena tero nga so ye tayi chane ribi chane techen bayi kong nung rogi mombo yaro haba da nga so tanda tero lama sinimba tesu karsa techen bayi se wara tawayi chane chane sen zamba langdwa 되게 다와기 개체시는 다른 것을 제세지 쇼발로 보면 두개 세대 변에 샤서 천원 총에는 레벨이 거라니 teaching 자체다 전에 로면 되는 거 사용이 리지여로 아니 야 베데 게서 베데 가서 게서 땡체는 제생이 저러 가서 이제 리 개체시의 것을요 로탈로 소버트는 제소나 베데 게서 땡에 정해서 던데 개체여래 단다 그 배치 대인도 가서 리드는 놀로라 아니 리드는 정생이 저러 게서 땡에 체생 던데 개체여러 던데 인도 맞도 저다 도대워시는 다들 상주 선바 대체는 말 홍종이 뜻이 되대 아니 상주기 생대지 자세지 담바데 존에 니 다들 신루라 소비 쇼발을 호용데 쇼바데 호면 등에 산동에 지지리 대 단다 그게 내 동벌로 쇼다네
그래서 저는 중원 마사고 말음지.
손을 중에 쳤다 가르사는 손을 주는 세다비 생제 태도가 세르마 두르 로면서 사다비 생제는 사고
No. So here now when it comes to the Chitta Matra, let's not talk about just a scripture, follower of the scripture or follower of the reasonings, but let's talk about the general Chitta Matra here. Chitta Matras, according to the text where it says their conducts are in accordance with the Mahayana. And so therefore, it is due to their conducts which accord with the Mahayana practice. So therefore, Lama Selingpa, although he's upholder of the Chitta Matran standpoint, his view is Chitta Matran, but his conducts are in accordance with the Mahayana. So therefore, Lama Selingpa, the master Selingpa is said to be the Mahayana, the master of my Mahayana master. So now here, it happens, when the bodhisattvas who enter into, whether it's whoever the bodhisattvas, whether it's a Chitta Matran or whoever, the bodhisattvas who actually enters into the bodhisattva's path, enter the first path, it's a path of accumulations. And within the accumulations, we have three different parts. That's path of accumulations of small, middling, and great, right? And so bodhisattvas who are enter on the path of the accumulations, the first path of the accumulations, by cultivating the bodhicitta and following the precepts of the bodhisattva's precepts. However, due to the very, heavy task or the responsibility that one must fulfill as the bodhisattvas, engaging in practice of six perfections and so forth, and such bodhisattvas and such individual may not be able to fulfill, which should be fulfilled by the bodhisattvas. And when they have this discouragement arises in their mind stream, and they fall back to wherever they came from, and they will degenerate their bodhisattva's vow.
내가 저 슈양세 때 등저가 말로 란데 유시 전 삼바데 로소나 샤추산 라사냥도라 다 들리지 쇼 투어면도 되래 나 가로 저 다참비 고바다네 야사산 야나 가로 니모번에 야사산 근데 란데 유시 절로 란데 잠바 유시 절로 것도 같이 줘서나 샤추산 다라냥도.
So as soon as whenever even the bodhisattva who actually generated the bodhisattva, bodhicitta, and enter into bodhisattva's path, the path of accumulations, and once, but then at some point, such bodhisattvas become discouraged by saying that now I'm not able to fulfill the wish of other sentient beings, cannot work for the welfare of entire sentient beings, but rather I must focus on my own attainment of nirvana or liberations would be better. At the moment that you have a very slightest thought of self-interest, the thought of self-interest will then degenerate your bodhicitta and automatically fall back to the path wherever you came from.
아니 지대 가서 던져라 지당 가서 리 던지는 게 셔디 가서게 라지라야 지 타바 차팅 지 계좌 생인데다야 스나 차팅 지 계좌 생인데 던져 차선을 열어 던져야 돼요 타투 타바선도 내게 생에서 그냥 던져게 따와시 동문다고 쳐봐요 던져게 인시 근데 그나 스나 타바 차팅 지 계좌 때는 명이 가서 열어있습니다 던져요 로다도 소가 제소나 근데 스나 차팅 열어 타바 차팅 계좌 때는 정세 던져게 셔요 근데 주타 소소저리마도 뭐내나시나 타바 차팅 지 계좌 영향 패치 강가리 영향을 지래 그래서 라지 리 생이죠 산재롱이 리
So here now, when it comes to the root virtue, it is a digit power. Once your root virtue is severed, you fall back to wherever you came from. So here the root virtue, again here now, when it comes to the root virtue, there are of two kinds. One is the Tarpa, which means the root virtue of attaining liberations, and root virtues of accumulating merits. Meritorious deeds, the root virtues of accumulating merits. And so it is based on different philosophical tenets. There is assertion of someone who doesn't have a root virtue, who actually severed their root virtue of attaining liberations, but not accepted by all those philosophical tenets. This is accepted by certain philosophical tenets of severed their, not having someone who do not have at the root virtue of attaining liberations. Everyone, regardless of who, and in general, the philosophical tenets, the philosophers believes and asserts that anyone in sentient beings who always possess this root virtue of attaining liberation, which is referring to the Buddha nature. The Buddha nature is possessed by entire sentient beings. But then when it comes to the certain philosophical tenets, there are assertion. There's a certain individual who may not have this root virtue of attaining liberations due to their wrong views. The once you have a very strong wrong views, it's actually severed your root virtue of attaining liberations.
근데 가서 넘버 셔게지 티칭 리전은 양 티칭 바 인비 메바메 티칭 바 인메도 상주선 넘버 줄래 저거 티칭이 리임메도 않고 티 조베 상지제 고고 타나서 베기 샤추선 라지 체니바 라지라 마잖아 근데 쇼도 등에 티칭이 리전생 들어요 티칭 리전 뭐 신도네 보세나 티면도 사여야만 모두 센서 뭐 뭐저데 티칭 리전이죠.
So here now, when it comes to the Mahayana the practitioners or Mahayanan, in other words, Tempa, which means the Mahayanans, the individual, the upholder or the great vehicle practice. Here, or there is the Mahayanan kind. There are two kinds that one should understand that. So here, the followers of the Chittamatrans are Mahayana kind, and that's a possibility of degenerating their bodhicitta and fall back to the path where they came from. But then Lasso. Any other questions?
I have a question.
I have a question also. Go ahead, Claire.
Okay. Well, thanks, Anne. I have a question for Rinpoche. If he could remind us how to purify if we feel like we have had a lapse in ethics.
Rinpoche, kunzo denso gi chedo. and Susu Sutum Nyambala Sotan, the Honda Chick Tomba Nyambala so, Tomba Cardian, the Nyambala so in the Yovina, and Tinzo Suchiak Chick Xiaojiang Chelia, Nyamne Karcho Yomete, and Kunzoya Tenson Nabene to sticker Karcho Yomete.
Ale, de dos rata, Chidang Asona, Damba most of the Killa Gendig Tonary, Damba most and Lensha Yasona, and the Damba Kono Shije, Konoragi, Shije, the cousin Chidang Asakasit in the Rosas, Shije, Koragi, and Chogatona Shije. That Zai Tuan Johnson, Shije, Yamarimato, Yala over the Tangas Yala de Senamato, to read the resetable, no, G. Bena Dambatani, no Sojon on the Shije, now G. Sanga get the names on that Danjul and the Shije, and it. Drigi Shijera, the Shanchu saying number the Yana, G. Shanchu saying number Jatalene, and Dambanyo Sacha and Doa. They joined the Tibiton and Rodama, the Lena with Yomara.
So, according to the text, the teachings of the precepts, and so whenever you know you think or you actually know that you have degenerated your vows or the precepts, if those precepts are that not the primary precepts or not the root vows, then it can be restored by oneself. Let's say by engaging in practice of the ritual, participating oneself in the ritual of restoring sojong, means the restoring and purifying practices. And then if you have degenerated, if you know that you have degenerated your bodhisattva's vow, you can restore bodhisattva's vow by taking bodhisattva's vow again. By receiving bodhisattva's vow again, will restore your degenerated bodhisattva's vow. Similarly, if you know that you are actually degenerated your sacred Mantrayana vow, the vows of the sacred Mantrayana, then one can restore the degenerated vows by engaging in the ritual of, self initiations or receiving the, initiations from the gurus.
Nyanga Chisho de Deredo, so you can't dumble and Dambateki, so the Tranka Casendo Dane, and the Dambate, Yamara Chubutamba Sunjana, Yamara Dambati Joji and the Joji de Tranka Jane, Ma Ishachane, and Gay do Amadu Shinjuche, and Gay and Down Sente, and Gay Mana got Trochane, and in Inchimichi, Hanchela Down Santa Shinchela, one Hanchel and Jason the Shinchela Down Sente Mena, and Divakarin Targomar Soedero. The Bear Naga Chambo.
So the very important for one to, safeguarding one's vows and precepts is to understand the numeration of the vows. We talked about the 10. If you're taking the lay vows, there are primarily of five of them. If you have taken all 5 of them, making sure that you remember the numeration, the number of vows that you have taken. And for instance, let's talk about Bodhisattva's vows. There are numerations. There are numerated vows that is to be observed, and as well as the sacred Mantrayana vows. So try to identify and try to understand all those vows individually, and then examine yourself. Have I done anything that is contrary to my vows? There are something that is, that makes my vows degenerated. So if you realize that you have actually degenerated your vows, and then you should commit yourself, never be on that, never engage in such actions which actually become a cause for degeneration of my vows. And then if you know that you have not degenerated your vows and you actually observe the vows, and you should be delighted and rejoice in keeping your vows. And this is very, very important. First commitment, enumeration, and making sure that whatever the action you may take, it is not contrary to the vows that you have taken.
되게 저다 좋아도 pendanga 좀 쉬우지를 가서 얘나 예빠든 가서 거야. 대중 가서 러데더로 주부담바 손질라 마속이 줄라 아니 지 메게 주봉게 추춘기 로또서를 상주선의 연주선의 야답이 다와 가래나 랑지를 든지기 로또 세나리 요구 세나리 든지기 또바데 제면 통인데 아니 하기 디파당 대다기 아니 사실 강가라 파도도 참아 든지기 아니 주든 병원 제면 되네 아니 또바다 랑지를 충분히 송도 와.
So this is very important question actually, it's always, why we are unable to have a realization of spiritual realization such as renunciation, bodhicitta, perfect views, and so on and so forth. It is all due to those obscurations that we have in us. The obscurations such as not being able to observe one's vows and degenerating one's vows, and all these afflictions and the views that we are holding are contrary to the precept that we have taken. Those are all of this become obstacles or the hindrance for the realizations, one's spiritual realizations. So therefore, one should always try to making sure that you purify whatever the vows that you have taken are degenerated, purifying by engaging, by participating in the rituals of purifying and and restoring and so on and so forth.
당가 손을 강해지 가르쳐들었으나 근데 배상도 소만 라라 추춘 대화다 라라 추춘 동해세데 아니 추춘이 변나 추춘이 제부터 대화 임바된 건지 제가 도와지 아니 내가 지연 충분되라 강에 동네 제가 도와지는 아니 추춘이 동해는지 동해기 제불 동해진 사대 그 콜은 주고 말이면 주디 걸로 세요로 라라 추춘 동해에서 돼 된대도 이제 추춘이 제부터 대화를 로아 진비 논시 챙기대로 대다 대화의 푸기 대화의 문제의 제도와 인선 내가 이 최대 아니 제대로 또 투고를 써도.
So the difficulty with us here is now where there are individuals who has a view of looking at the observation of our ethical discipline or the precepts or something that is the root, that is the cause of our happiness. There are unfortunately other individuals who upholds a view of looking at the practice of observing precepts or practice of observing ethical disciplines are rather, burden. It is additional suffering. So then someone who holds the view of looking at the ethical practice of ethical discipline is something that is the cause of suffering, then such individual will, certainly will not actually follow, engage in the practice of observing ethical discipline, which will result in miserable, experiences as by doing that. So therefore, we should understand that, if you really follow this and observe one's ethical disciplines very purely, then the result is happiness. So therefore, we have practice by engaging, as a result of engaging practice of generosity, one have abundance of the resource. As a result of engaging in pure ethical disciplines, one gain happiness.
每个这帮个出去送一件呢，可能你不相信的，可能没个这个没哇，没别的车店，没别的别到手机查查了，查查呢，说了没了，等于有过去我的搞通一个没经验说呢，没得怎么涨价了，大概就没个文字钱的嘛钱呢，可能一下呢。
Whether when someone consider oneself as a good person or bad person, so long as you are able to observe, so long as the individual who is able to observe the 10 virtuous actions and abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions, what fault that we may find from that person, just think about it. This person is very pure. I mean, this is very pure. So regardless of what others' opinion, we cannot find any fault from that person. Think about someone who actually observed very strictly and purely of their 10 virtuous actions and abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions.
Megi Chubong gets the mature the Takanja make a train, Tananga Jaka train the Jin, Nala train the Megi Chubu train the song over it, and Chushon the Shemagoroa. And the children Jite Kangi Chana Shenaya, Megi Chubu Kalesa came Marangaso, Dijin Lane to the Chejeroa. Doesn't join by the Nganzijan any, Soso Gichison Tungena, Soso Raji shed the Chadoda.
So the importance of observing the 10 virtuous actions or the 10 precepts are not purely from the standpoint of the religious perspective. It's not purely from the religious perspective. It requires both religious and non-religious and secular, in other words, because this is needed. If one is able to observe purely of this ethical discipline, the 10 precepts, you have no room. There's no room for you to actually commit any crime.
This is Bonnie. May I ask my question now?
Yes, sure.
Rinpoche said, I wrote it down, the thought of self-interest will degenerate the path of bodhicitta. One of the things that makes me very uncomfortable when we begin these chapters, especially in this book, they go through all the ways you'll benefit. It would be so good for you if you do this, you don't, etc., etc. So I'm always uncomfortable.
Bonnie, can you repeat? You're breaking, so I just can't hear.
I'll put it closer to my mouth.
Yes, Parachil.
Did you get about self-interest degenerating the path of bodhicitta? If this is true, why do we begin every chapter with a long list of this will be good for you and it'll be bad for you, and think about that? Doesn't that not open self-interest as a motivation? Isn't it enough to just do it because it's right? You have to think about, oh, I want to have a beautiful complexion in my next life, that sort of stuff.
Okay. Momo Teresha, then the once you say that Randu Koji and the chick. The Kulunji left the guy and Susu, the Chanju get some down in the gate there, Lamsan Horopa, Nyam to a Kinyangayo to Sumbra was. That did Jebin and that chick Simja on the Tame, but Karim being a cochick, Marazo chick Yamlet Che on the Kablia chick. That bit Savan Yamlet Jay and the Yamlet Karjab and the D. Devuchik don't the Negro was. Devuchik don't the Nebe Kabli and all these Jonas and Belogic Legro was. Really around the Kojic, Karjan lady was. And the chick Su Seboya Tauta and the chick Samba Samboya Chick Lavi and Benele, Kongachi or Legro was in Yamdolia. The lady around the Kojic to Lake, what they live in any Kanderesta.
Te intimate Techada, take a moment to catch it and answer on a bunny catch at the Aushuje. The Chetan was Teroa. Pena the jungle was the Rajin, then Rajin, then a Rodush Shanchus and a Jiva. Rani get any so Genda Chegore, and this Sinjang then so Genda Chego said. Roa. So Chico Sanatone Yabo, Yamedua. Make a Sanatos on Zewa Chagudu, Suchin Song and make it solo go Chegba. Go, don't you? Me, the Dutch was Javana, don't you kiss on the Rani Lewer?
So now here, it's a good question too. And so in order to fulfill the purpose of oneself, fulfilling the purpose of oneself and that of other beings here, it's all the practice of bodhicitta. The practice of bodhicitta. When we are speaking about engaging in the practice of bodhicitta, it always reminds us that when you practice bodhicitta, it's not only fulfilling the bodhicitta, it's something that is so altruistic intention that work for the welfare solely for the other sentient beings, but it also benefits oneself. It is benefiting both oneself and other beings. It actually fulfills both one's own wish and that of other sentient beings.
Tero Pena Masun, the world Yakaching to the Redoa. Any Kambalin Kare and take Lakapita, which you get the Koroy Tandaki Mare, me the become Lakapita Chichureda, me the Kroya with Tadaredwa.
So let's talk about, someone who is having solely focusing on their own interest. Let's talk about one individual who owns a, manufacturing company or whatever, who is putting all efforts and energy to work so pure and try to work as hard as he could. And his sole purpose, his or her sole purpose is to fulfill his own wish and meet the criteria of the company, his own company.
Alaba de Mejina Daro, Kulaga Yabuchego, Kolaja Power, Kanko Gabuche, Jessica, Kupi Laka Yabuche Daro. Mato Korochico in San of the Mejata Koga, which Mare, any Lagache on the Chiparwa.
So then here, even though that you're working for some company, and if you're working very, if you dedicate yourself and working, honestly and working very hard to the company, and then you're at one point, from the one side that you actually, on the one hand that you're actually working very hard, and on the other hand, by working hard, that you also gain benefits out of it. It is fulfilling others and one's own wish as well, right? You by working hard, you may promote your, you will get promotions, and your salary will be, increased and so forth.
Pena Tanju Korongi said, Zun Zebo Yum, but the Kariche Dorsana, Korongi Chedamare, Mejada Koron Gabo Yumitandaro. Soso Zun Zebo Yum at the Gobakare, Mejada Soso Gabitandaro.
So here, just having a good complexion, again here, it's not, if you really think very carefully, just to have a good complexion is not to really to please oneself, right? We also have another motivation here. The subtle motivation is to please others too. You want it to be attractive to others. So that the very purpose of having a good complexion is to make someone happy.
Tanga Songi number ship, Nanga Tiderda, Rani Sanju Sambala Randa Yoreda, Rani Jambi Tanda de Yomares, Rani Gitanda Kancheva de Jengi Chet the Chegre, Jengi Leka Yabuche, Susu Randa the Shola do Yongore Setere, Jubun Renda, Jubun Ring, Timoyla, the Jubun Ring, number Shechua. The Ganda Cheyama.
Bodhisattvas will not, work solely for his or her own self. They are dedicated their activities for the welfare of other sentient beings. By working for the welfare of other sentient beings and the fulfillment of one's own purpose and one's own wish by product, by working for the welfare of other sentient beings.
This is the pay more sugar. When the Tiringa Kalaya was in Malaka Dogo, say Chesona, Leka Che the Kalas award, then that is also Jago, Jayungore, Jagoro.
So here now, for example, that I'm going to work right now. I have to go to work and I must eat. I must eat well. So now it looks like that you are working, you are eating right now for the purpose of going to work. But this is not what you are acting actually. You are actually, just to make sure that you have enough food yourself and fulfilling your own wish that you don't actually remain hunger. Okay, any questions?
I had a question about about something Rinpoche said during the teaching today. It's my understanding that non-monastics take the vows of restraint, and then the vows of individual liberation are taken by monastics.
Uh-huh.
what are the important differences that we would want to be aware of between these two?
Okay. And I call you to check kind of don't but soon get on it and the teacher and you don't be don't but sure what
Oh.
don't but don't but then on it that then a Rabjungi don't but nearly cabbage chess once.
Oh.
Ni barrel cava cargo younger me, tinny cabbage soon on us.
Oh. That didn't she say, do a penang that the door, Nazon Penny, you should don't be switching says on a you should the copy get switching Mato Dambas Mareda. Dambaina G din a lango. Pena Nasuki Chimbaki Dambachi, lemon you Kasa Jilla, and make it you point you can't Yosona, Della, any make it you don't be switching and a lagrimato, make it your pombi switching Marcasa Dambas Lagmarielada.
So here, let's make a distinction of the ethical discipline of restraint and the precepts. First of all, let's make a distinction between these two. The ethical discipline of restraint includes 10 non-virtuous actions. Okay, well, we are not actually receiving any vows to do that. It is you are actually restraining yourself. You are actually abstaining yourself from engaging in such actions of the 10 non-virtuous actions. And this doesn't necessarily be received such a precept. It doesn't require, there's no involvement of participating in the rituals to receive such, precepts to observe the 10 non-virtuous actions. It doesn't require.
No, the number said, you should don't be switching, you should God be switching. Then you should don't be done by Insona, and then also, Yana Sota in again, Kela Gendu to Lagoroa. Inside the Dambachi, Kela Gendu to Lamagoa, and then make it your monkey switching the you should God be switching the and don't be switching, don't be switching Chagrimato, Damba Chagmare.
So it is just a restraining or refraining oneself from engaging in such acts. You're not actually receiving any precepts for that.
Oh, you know, civil city, then also number share. When you Jimmy Jangason, you switch on you should not be switching dealer in the Kazayana, in the Dambaji, the Donden Kaza Yigomare. Donden Mokazal Moncha, and JP Kanamato, Song Jingore.
The first part of that, the division, the ethical discipline we talked about, the first one, the ethical discipline of the restraint. It is all, restraints, it is the wrong by nature. It is if one actually engage in any of those 10 non-virtuous actions, it is wrong by nature, whether you have taken precepts or not. It doesn't require any receiving precepts. So long as you have engaged in such actions of these 10 non-virtuous actions, it is wrong by nature. But then if you have received the precepts, then there is a prohibitions. It's a proscribed. You are receiving, this is not wrong by nature, but you wanted to commit yourself to observe such precepts, what we call the precept, the proscribed, the precept of proscribed, or the prohibitions.
아니 예동이 찬에 시에서는 제비카나 마토에 가서 제비카나 마토에 예바도 요거를 마도 라시 카나 마토에 예바도 요거를 마도 제비카나 마도 예바도 요거 말이야. 당대되면은
If you have not taken any precepts, that's a proscribed precepts, you will not, the precepts that are proscribed or the prohibitions is a prohibited, in other words. So you will not, if you have done something that is contrary to that precepts, involved in that precepts, you will not have any, you will not degenerate any of your vows. But then if you have done something that is contrary to the first the discipline, which is the discipline of restraint, ethical discipline of restraint, and any of 10 non-virtuous actions, you are actually committing, non-virtuous, or you are actually committing non-virtuous actions. So you So we will go through this explanation. We'll also, later on, we will touch that topics in detail when we go through the text of this ethical discipline letter.
Yeah. The Chenny but say not as it on and did the Cassere and the email as it on Mubacher. I'm not to Tenriki Chibache came and do it. And I 10 Magias came and do it. The number shed the whole.
So this is actual explanation that I've given with regard to the differences of the vows and the precepts and the ethical discipline of restraints. But then if you are a debater, there's quite complex debate that we may have. So we're almost running out of time, and wondering any questions? Anyone who has questions?
Sanatone share mengenda betiji tendriki kimaro and the kaya lale to each in zane, and it tendriki jimmy yane, the children yane, does any shanchu sembi yane, yenzane, any shanchu sembi yane, kan, any John Somba na yege, the Rani ye, kan, gosom, tonal, kan, you to do chi. When a chene, Jumbo Motoba, and just a shanchu no sambana. Chijin the Shobana Yega Rani, then I get a young show Sanani. They are Raja Sajata Zubi Sanji Gova, Toby Chet the Insan, and Chagi Chambochite, Tendri Hua, the Mama Jeshaina, the so low which is Sado.
So let's do our dedications. With this dedication and prayers at the end of one's teachings will really enables one to accumulate a tremendous amount of merits by taking a little time of dedicating and praying. So here now, let's dedicate our merits that I'm able to engage in this practice, in listening to the teachings of the Bodhisattva's deeds, such as deeds of practice of generosity, ethical discipline, so on and so forth, and as it in accordance with the text, I'm able to listen to the teachings in accordance with the authentic texts that are written by the great masters, and henceforth, I will do my best to engage in the actions of my body, speech, and minds in accordance to the Bodhisattva's actions, Bodhisattva's deeds, Bodhisattva's conducts. And may I be able to, achieve those realizations of the Bodhisattvas, in other words, Bodhichitta, as soon as possible to gain the state of enlightenment. Therefore, may all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas bless me to be able to do this for the benefit of all other sentient beings.
tene redo bede sonye kada yamba kanje sabane lamye mare ke don jowano nandre jaye ombo dojo Dhamma sebe sera gendo yang jambe yang je sebe jezon dembe remba kyunza lang je chu nian zhubi je na nie xie chu rangi je jian du bi lang je xiu zha zi yue zhang yue dao ge ji zhuo yue yin zhe mian ba si xie Yā yue dāmbā yu rīn sīn jū jī, dāmbā rīn jīn chō kī mō chō bō, chā chā nyāng bō chū bī shū dī nī, nī jī chīn bū yī rō chū bō yī, bī dī 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 sī wā shī bō shū, sī jīn jā yu mī yōng chī lī nī, lī rū xiāng chū lāng jī rī bī jāng. 唐的南街也南北的心，家园在把人都中就近，南藏主边天界主仙境，夜间世界门当面面根，切到更多家园红包也，南道这我梦就近，刚才天宝求了去学去。 最近住了尊宝天元子，土地能就大多主席经，这些将子说了就经，就是那面古在绕的经，那个城里说着结不动，老张对面这面撒松经，落叶面色大多年就经。 康热热，过夜星光如别当的阿摩的酒业，现日在我对人叫做业，小别身体不多点酒气，江边抱怨知道情报。 更多上不点样点见的，得到根据结束道路去，给我得到堂前绕多我，就说西边叫我堂前，我刚了就多我不的，那些个月早我就跟讲，上不学习绕多我。 Oh, yeah, Tuche. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you,
Thank you,
Nimba.
Rinpoche. Thanks very much.
Tuche. Genima Tuche.
Also, Rinpoche,